emerged much stronger. This period has shown that there are points of compatibility and strength in the India-Russia strategic partnership that both sides can count on, both sides can depend on and use to mutual benefit. And the indicators of that are pretty clear. The contact and communication at the highest level between our leaders, India and Russia, has been kept constant. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin met in Samarkand physically, but they also have had a number of telephone conversations. Our External Affairs Minister was here in Moscow, Foreign Minister Lavrov was there in Delhi. Our National Security Advisor has visited Russia and has been in constant touch. And there are a number of other contacts that are continuing. India-Russia bilateral trade has almost doubled. It is a record. It shows the strength of our bilateral relationship to adapt to difficult and unforeseen, unpredictable international circumstances. Our major projects, either be it in the area of defense, our flagship nuclear project in the Kudankulam area has been doing well. Space cooperation is progressing. We might ask ourselves the question, why is it that India-Russia relations is able to withstand international challenges unlike so many other countries? There have been a number of international geopolitical transitions. Geopolitical transition of 1945-1947, the geopolitical transition of the Cold War, the geopolitical transition of the Sino-Soviet split, the geopolitical transition of the rapprochement between the United States and China, the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991-92, and thereafter the present transition of the big split that has come in international relations between Russia and the collective West. But in each of these transitions, not only has India-Russia relations been able to withstand this change, but each stage has emerged stronger. The three reasons I think are not just the absence of any fundamental conflict between India and Russia, but actually a convergence of national interest and geopolitical interests. Second is the excellent level of understanding, mutual trust and communication between our leaders, and this is exemplified by the very strong personal relationship that exists between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin, and this has been seen on a number of occasions. Thirdly, I think there is still a very strong public sentiment in both countries that each of the people think well and wish well for the other. Let me say a few things about multipolarity. Surely multipolarity is an objective for both India and Russia, but it is also an objective fact in international relations today. The strategic genius of Mr. Primakovsky was to visualize multipolarity not only as a conceptual objective, but he also enumerated conceptual instruments for its attainment. But his vision and his time of multipolarity has changed. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, multipolarity was visualized as Russia, India, China. But I think the world has become far more complicated. It has evolved. So I think there is need for us to understand multipolarity in a more dynamic fashion. And I will put forward 6 principles that we may keep in mind to understand and adapt to the current requirements of multipolarity. However, the first principle is that by definition, multipolarity means we say no to unipolarity and domination. And in one sense, you can understand the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that is presently taking place, and you see it in the historical context. It is Russia's way of saying it will not accept a unipolarity in Europe, and it will not accept the domination that it entailed. The second point is that multipolarity assumes that each of the poles will have strategic autonomy and choice. That is true of India, very much so. It is true of the Russian Federation. But for each pole to emerge in its own right, the strategic autonomy is a necessity. Third, by talking about strategic autonomy does not exclude partnership. And partnership that is mutually beneficial and is underwritten by mutual benefit. So partnership also means no exclusivity. There will be freedom amongst the poles of the multipolar world to interact with each other, to find the best balance, the most advantageous balance of interests that will take place. Fourth, it also means that the world will not be safe if there are permanent divisions. The world has emerged after the Cold War, and we all are witness to the dangers of permanent divisions. While some form of conflict is unavoidable, I think the pathway and the doorways to dialogue should be open, should be kept open, and every pathway for dialogue should be used to explore how to bring down divisions. And this is in this spirit, I think we need to understand Prime Minister Modi's call that this is not an era of war, because he also not just represents the spirit of the Indian approach, but a sentiment across the world that peace is better than war. It is more advantageous, it gives more benefits, and the international system is more sustainable. The fifth is that it should be driven by the ideals of mutual benefit and mutual trust. The sixth, the last point, is that multipolarity requires effective multilateralism, reform of multilateralism. That while the poles can cooperate with each other, there is also interest and benefit in a larger international system that is driven by a strong, vibrant, reformed, multilateral structures. It is in this spirit that we approach 2023 with great hope. India will be chairing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India will be chairing the G20. Of course, these are extremely important bodies in their own rights, and India will be taking over the chairmanship of these two very important bodies at a critical time in the international situation. Prime Minister Modi's open article that has been published sets out the philosophy, our objectives, our ambitions. The title of the G20 summit that will take place in India later next year is One Earth, One Family, One Future. But I can assure you that as far as India is concerned, our partnership with Russia will remain one of the pillars of our external engagement, both bilaterally and in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and in the G20. With that, I will thank you.
Спасибо большое. Ваше мнение очень важно для нас. Мы знаем, что у нас огромный дипломатический опыт, и вы хорошо знаете Россию, поскольку служили здесь послом. И я думаю, что трудно не согласиться с 6 принципами, которые вы изложили. Но, конечно, это принцип идеального мира. Хотелось бы, чтобы все мы придерживались этих принципов и жили в такого рода условиях. Жизнь, конечно, намного более противоречивая, но стремиться к этому очень важно. И я вот делал такие вступительные ремарки. Забыл упомянуть действительно о том, что Индия будет председателем ШОС. То есть у Индии сегодня исключительно важные функции, которые связаны с существованием этих институтов, 20-ки, Шанхайской организации сотрудничества. И, конечно, позиция Индии в этих институтах играет огромную роль. Я сейчас хотел бы и прокомментировать, и просить высказать свое мнение по этим вопросам Алексея Куприяна в этой группе Южной Азии, региона Индийского океана, в ИМАМО. Пожалуйста.
Спасибо большое, Анатолий Васильевич. И огромное спасибо послу в армии за глубокую картину российско-индийских отношений и, главное, того, как Индия видит эти отношения. Знаете, я вот сижу на этой сцене, я испытываю очень странное чувство дежавю, потому что 1,5 года назад на предыдущих Примаковских чтениях я говорил, что нам не хватает в отношениях с Индией 3 вещей. То есть первое – это понимание того, зачем нам вообще нужно это сотрудничество. Второе – это стратегия этого сотрудничества. И третье – это достаточное количество людей, которые могли бы это сотрудничество обеспечить. Понятно, что за 1,5 года эти вопросы решить было нельзя, но за это время случилась очень важная вещь. Мы внезапно осознали, зачем нам нужна Индия. После 24 февраля, после начала известных событий на Украине, Россия оказалась под экономическими санкциями, и мы лишились доступа к европейским, американским и японским технологиям, рынкам и инвестициям. Это около половины нашего товарооборота и больше половины инвестиций в нашу экономику. Нам пришлось экстренно искать замену, и Индия стала одной из тех стран, которые пришли нам тогда на помощь. Сейчас партнерство с Индией помогает выжить целым областям нашей экономики. Мы понимаем, что Индия закупает наши углеводороды и наши удобрения по доброте душевной, прежде всего потому, что ей это выгодно, она заполняет свои склады, свои хранилища и стимулирует свое экономическое развитие. Но эти закупки очень важны для нас, потому что они позволяют не останавливать производство, они позволяют прямо и опосредованно дают работу и заработок миллионам людей. Продажи даже с такими скидками лучше, чем остановка производства, и спасибо за это индийским друзьям. И отдельное спасибо за политическую позицию Индии. Мы видим, какому жесткому давлению подвергаются индийские политики и официальные лица на каждой встрече с западными коллегами. Я не забуду свои ощущения от апрельского заседания России в Нью-Дели, когда на каждой панели, чему одна не была посвящена, участию женщин в политике, преодолению последствий ковида, афганскому вопросу, западные участники снова и снова поднимали вопросы о действиях России. И мы очень благодарны премьер-министру Нарендре Моди и министру иностранных дел Индии доктору Джайшанкару, его коллегам-дипломатам, индийским политикам за то, что они это давление выдерживают уже почти год. Мы знаем, как велик вес Индии в мире, и особенно в незападном мире, и то, что Индия не осуждает Россию за спецоперацию, нам помогает очень-очень сильно. Но я бы сейчас хотел поговорить о стратегическом измерении наших отношений, потому что чем бы конфликт ни завершился, санкции в ближайшее время вряд ли будут сняты, и наш товарооборот с Западом полностью не восстановится. Мы обречены выживать в этом новом суровом мире, и роль Индии в этом мире для нас возрастает многократно. Индия для нас становится мостом к тем западным инвестициям, технологиям и рынкам, которые мы потеряли. Пускай не напрямую, как раньше, пускай через совместные фирмы, фонды, это лучше, чем ничего. И, во-вторых, в главных, Индия сама по себе превращается в нашего важнейшего партнера. Это 5-я экономика мира, которая уверенно движется к статусу 3-й экономики. Это страна с мощной индустриальной базой, куда сейчас идут инвестиции и технологии Соединенных Штатов, из ЕС, АСЕАН, из Японии, Южной Кореи, включая такие ценные, как производство полупроводников. Индия создает для них необходимую инфраструктуру, готовит рабочую силу, и ее программы развития поражают своей грандиозностью. И самое главное, что эти программы развития медленно, шаг за шагом, но осуществляются. То есть мы видим, как сейчас на наших глазах создается технологический гигант, который при этом совершенно не хочет превращаться в придаток Запада и в придаток Китая, но собирается развивать собственную промышленность и достичь технологического суверенитета. То есть делать то же, чего хотим мы. Наши цели совпадают, и я бы сказал, что сама судьба нас подталкивает к сотрудничеству и глубочайшему партнерству. Что Индия может нам дать, кроме того, чтобы заместить ушедших с нашего рынка западных производителей? Прежде всего, свои технологии в тех областях, где Индия значительно нас опережает. Это фарма, это софт, это медицинские технологии, биотехнологии в целом и отдельное направление хай-тека. Что мы можем дать Индии? Мы можем ей дать наш уникальный технологический опыт в сфере высоких технологий, оборонку, наши агротехнологии, наши ресурсы. Это список, разумеется, не полон, направлений сотрудничества гораздо больше. Но если Индия решится на глубокое партнерство с нами, она сможет в 1,5-2 раза ускорить рост своей экономики за счет вливания наших технологий и наших ресурсов. Для этого надо очень много сделать. Для этого индийским политикам, крупному бизнесу придется коренным образом изменить свои стратегические планы и осознать, что Россия может стать для Индии самым перспективным партнером и ключом к статусу сверхдержавы. Это нелегко сделать, учитывая, что совсем недавно наш товарооборот составлял всего 11 миллиардов долларов. Сейчас он растет из-за западных санкций, неизвестно, насколько этот рост продолжится дальше. Чтобы индийские политики и бизнесмены поняли ценность сотрудничества с нами, помогли нам пройти этот сложный период, нам, как России, придется очень много потрудиться. Надо сделать так, чтобы индийские компании, которые приходят к нам, не боялись попасть во вторичные санкции. Надо делать так, чтобы индийские банки были готовы с нами работать. Для этого надо разработать механизмы, которые позволили бы вывести финансовые товарные потоки в Россию из-под западного контроля. И на этом пути нам придется преодолеть инерцию мышления, не только индийскую, но и нашу. Нам придется привыкнуть к новым, непривычным для нас форматам. Нам придется не бояться признать, что многие из тех принципов, которые мы до того исповедовали, за которые мы выступали, больше не работают в новых условиях. Потому что, скорее всего, делать это придется с использованием тех механизмов, с которыми мы на прошлом витке развития так успешно боролись. То есть это серые схемы, теневые зоны, другие специфические технологии, о которых я здесь не буду распространяться, чтобы не облегчать задачу нашим западным коллегам. Понятно, что наши позиции на этом пути далеко не всегда будут совпадать. Индии не по душе наше тесное сотрудничество с Китаем, не всегда нравятся наши шаги на пакистанском треке, а мы не одобряем индийское сотрудничество с Соединенными Штатами и подозрением относимся к индийской дружбе с Японией. Но давайте попробуем сделать из этого лимон и лимонад. Давайте поймем, что вот мир на наших глазах сейчас вползает в холодную войну, и наши хорошие отношения с противоборствующими сверхдержавами и наша дружба между собой, между Россией и Индией, дает этому миру уникальный шанс. Возможность не разрывать технологические цепочки, возможность обмениваться технологиями и сохранять единое пространство взаимодействия Востока и Запада, и Севера и Юга. Это ценный актив, и давайте его беречь. Спасибо.
Вы говорили о нашем взаимодействии, в том числе в торгово-экономической сфере, которая для России сегодня имеет принципиальное значение. Конечно, оно важно очень и для Индии, кстати говоря, наш товарооборот растет, и считается, что он вскоре достигнет цифры 30 миллиардов. Это уже солидная цифра, правда, она не сопоставима пока с цифрой нашего товарооборота с Китаем. Но ясно совершенно, что Индия, прежде всего, исходит из своих национальных интересов, в том числе из интересов развития экономики и обеспечения национальной безопасности. И у нас очень многолетнее и эффективное сотрудничество в области военно-технического сотрудничества. Конечно, оно призвано и обеспечить, в том числе, безопасность Индии в военном плане. Я хотел бы спросить нашего уважаемого коллегу Суджан Чиноя, директора Института оборонных исследований и анализа, как ему видится наше сотрудничество по стратегическим вопросам, связанным с складывающейся стратегической обстановкой в зоне Индо-Пацифика. Может быть, несколько слов просил бы вас сказать о Куаде, поскольку вокруг Куад очень много дискуссий у нас, и до конца, как я думаю, нет еще понимания, какую же роль играет там Индия, вообще в какой степени Индия заинтересована в Куаде, как видит перспективы развития четверки. Пожалуйста.
Thank you very much for inviting me to Moscow at the Primakov readings. And I come to you not only as the Director General of India's largest defense and security think tank, but also for this year at least, as the Think 20 chair for India during the G20 presidency. And therefore it's my intention to reach out to as many people as possible and to try and forge new friendships as well during this visit. Before I come to the Indo-Pacific and the Quad, I think it is imperative that I should dwell a little bit on the very firm underpinnings of our bilateral relations between India and Russia. We have a long-standing partnership, as you all know, that's actually served us well. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as the saying goes. Our partnership covers a very broad range of practical cooperation in fields ranging from trade, investment, energy, commodities, as well as sensitive domains like defense, space and nuclear. And when we look back in history, we see that the Soviet Union, of which the Russian Federation is the legatee state, played a very key role in strengthening India's capabilities in nuclear, space, defense, as well as the industrial sector at a time when we had attached great priority to heavy industry in the 1950s. And this country has also helped India in safeguarding its national security. On the political front, there is a history of reciprocally supportive actions. For instance, the 1971 Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation was not a military alliance, but it strengthened India's strategic autonomy. And it is that strategic autonomy that is still evident in the manner in which we deal with the Russian Federation today. It is the same strategic autonomy that has permitted us to maintain issue-based alignments in an increasingly multipolar world order. Indians, as you know, have generally a very positive image of Russia as a reliable friend and partner, and high-level dialogue as well as the personal chemistry between our leaders has also added great impetus to this particular relationship. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation exercised new choices. Even you had exercised new choices then. That was a phase. But during that period also, I think Mr. Primakov played a very important role in enabling us to smoothen out a path for the trajectory of our ties. However, ties with India, as has already been brought out, have always remained friendly and cooperative. And in 1998, I remember when I was director in the Ministry of External Affairs handling China, I recall that when we tested our nuclear weapons, Russia was the only major power that supported the Indian position, and we have not forgotten that. Over the decades, India and Russia have maintained close relations in diverse sectors, and that's a kind of continuation. The global situation, friends, today is very complex. It's full of uncertainty and unpredictability, and no two countries are absolutely aligned with one another. And I think when you look at concepts such as the quadrilateral security dialogue or the BRICS or the SCO, I think it's instructive to keep in mind that this is an age of hedging, an age of multi-alignment. It's an age of issue-based alignments which create overlapping circles of friendship and cooperation. Sometimes these bring about little discomfort and difficulty as well. Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, had said in the 19th century that there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. But I think when we look at India-Russia relations, one thing stands out, that our ties have stood the test of time and that our friendship is permanent. The past few years have seen dramatic changes in the global strategic landscape, and the effects of the pandemic have been compounded by great power contestation, as we all know, in trade, technology, territory, tenets, and there is a great sort of deficit of trust as we go along. And I think the global system, the multilateral organizations have been quite incapable of handling not just COVID, but the other two C's, the C of climate crisis and conflict, which is all around us now. The big challenge in our bilateral relations, I think, is to manage perceptions and expectations. It's quite unlikely that the heady days of the past, the halcyon days, will not be repeated. And multi-alignment gives every country, whether India or Russia, a chance to kind of enhance their strategic elbow room, so to speak. And we have to therefore emerge from the past and the presumptions and the assumptions and focus on what we can leverage as a result of this great trust that exists between the two countries. So I think trust is a very important vector when it comes to our bilateral ties. And let me assure you, and this is the thinking of the strategic community in India, that India will never do anything to harm Russia's interests. And we have a similar expectation as well of Russia. So we've always attached great importance to resolution of differences through dialogue, and you're aware that that is one of the reasons why, based on our ethos of peace and non-violence, of the teachings of Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi, that the Prime Minister of India should have said what he did, which is that now is not the last war. And you will understand where we are coming from in that context. We also believe that this world is rather inequitable, and in the G20 presidency it's going to be our endeavor to inject as much as possible this notion of equity for the global south as well, for the emerging economies. And I think that's a space where India and Russia can also work together to develop equal access to digital infrastructure, rules of the road for cyberspace, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence. And without that kind of peace and cooperation, I dare say it would be absolutely impossible to tackle the larger issues like terrorism or climate change, or even more fundamentally, economic recovery. And so anything that de-risks the global economy today and stabilizes the global order should receive our widest support. A couple of other points as well, if you permit. For us, from my perspective, Russia is an Eurasian power. More importantly, Russia is also a Pacific power. The Indo-Pacific, in my view, is an inclusive concept which caters to the aspirations of a wider and more representative community today. Economic growth and progress in our part of the world are no longer confined to a particular geography. India has emerged as the fastest growing economy in the world today, and this kind of trajectory of high growth rates, 6.5% or more, at a time when the global average is less than half that. China's growth rate has come down to 2.5%. This kind of growth trajectory for India is likely to stay for years to come. And India believes that, I believe, that Russia's policy of power na Vostok, turn to the east, it should take into account the fact that the political and economic geography or the center of gravity of Asia is moving beyond East Asia and China to other parts of the Indo-Pacific. This is a very important concept. And I think this morning, when I was listening to Mr. Yuri Ushakov and Mr. Alexander Lincoln, I saw hints of that kind of thinking there, whether horizontal or vertical, as they described it. And so I think Russia needs to bring that understanding much more in the practice of its diplomacy. The concepts of Greater Eurasia and the Indo-Pacific are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they supplement each other. India recognizes Russia's equities in the Indo-Pacific. From our point of view, the quadrilateral security dialogue is not a military alliance. It is not a naval alliance, although we do have, in a similar configuration, our Malabar exercises, but they are not directed against any one particular country. This is an era in which there is a surfeit of not only bilateralism, regionalism, but plurilateralism in general. And so therefore, I don't think the quadrilateral security dialogue should spook the Russian Federation into believing things about it that are really unrealistic. We need more pillars of cooperation, even at this juncture, in our bilateral relations. And I think we must therefore promote our bilateral trade, try and make it more equitable. If there are barriers to Indian imports in Russia, I think we should be looking at that quite closely. Given the focus on healthcare, on medical care, on the pharmaceutical sector, and I do believe that Russians have a right to access cheaper generic drugs, particularly at this point of time. I see no reason why your market should be dominated by Western pharmacopoeia, and I see no reason why India cannot come in as a provider, kind of physician to the rest of the world at a very affordable rate at that. Lastly, I think we must also work to enhance connectivity between us. We need to work together with regard to the Arctic. You have a friend in India, and we can do things together in the scientific realm without encroaching on anyone's sovereignty or territorial integrity. Connectivity through the international north-south transport corridor or the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor, these will promote our ties as well. In our flagship initiative, there is one very important initiative called Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense manufacturing. And that's the goal of making India self-reliant in terms of our defense supply chains, which we believe can hold the country to ransom in times of need. We've seen it in healthcare as well. And it is this area which is a natural field for Russia to enter, because Russia has this long history of being in India in the defense sector, of having actually worked very comfortably with our defense forces and also transferred technology, production lines in India, in keeping with our Make in India objectives. Russia is one of the few countries that's done that, and we could do even more of it. So mutual investments in infrastructure are also important. Perhaps we can also work together in tapping mineral resources, rare earths, and why not the nuclear field as well. We should go beyond the bilateral part in the nuclear field to look at third countries. So I think all this makes for very good cooperation. My last point is that before entering this room, I was asked what kind of pressure is being brought to bear on India when it comes to purchasing energy from Russia. And I said to my interviewer that there is no pressure, and that the decision that India makes to acquire energy from Russia and at what price it will acquire this, these decisions will only be made through bilateral negotiations in Delhi and Moscow, and in no third capital in the world. And that is what we stand for, our strategic autonomy. I think there is a great deal more that we can do together in this emerging world order. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Я хотел бы обратить внимание на наши тезисы, связанные с стратегической эмпатией, которая проявляется в обе страны, выстраивая свою внешнюю политику в отношении друг друга и на глобальную внешнюю политику. Мне кажется, что очень важно, что мы хорошо понимаем в основном позицию наших индийских коллег, и индийские коллеги, о чем свидетельствует события последнего времени, понимают нашу позицию, проблемы наши. И это очень важно. И второй момент, о котором вы говорили, очень, мне кажется, ярко, связан с необходимостью диверсификации нашего сотрудничества во всех областях, естественно, в области торговли, но и в области технологического сотрудничества, в том числе и военно-технического сотрудничества. У нас, конечно, есть блестящие примеры такого рода сотрудничества, в частности, в области ядерных технологий. И с нами сегодня на панели Николай Спасский, заместитель генерального директора корпорации «Росатом», посол. И я хотел бы, Николай, попросить вас выступить. Давайте мы послу скажем спасибо, послу в армию, он улетает. Желаем доброго пути.
Уважаемый Анатолий Васильевич, дамы и господа, большое спасибо. У нас сегодня международное собрание, к тому же очень авторитетное. На международном собрании все-таки, наверное, самое главное — это гости, поэтому я для простоты буду говорить по-английски. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the organizers of the readings for including our topic in the agenda. Mr. Torkunov was absolutely right. Excuse me for repeating the word. It's not just a brilliant case. It's a unique case, probably worldwide. The cooperation between Russia and India in the field of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It reflects on the very special nature of the relations between the two countries and vice versa. First and foremost, of course, along with the military technical cooperation, it's one of the centerpieces and one of the essential pillars of our relationship. On another hand, I do believe that in all probability, it's the most complex and the most vibrant of any bilateral relationships in the world in the field of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. I'll give a few facts and figures. So, I'll be brief. We have 2 nuclear power units in India, constructed according to Russian design, supplied with Russian equipment, each one of 1,000 megawatts installed capacity, and all in all, up to now, they have produced approximately 77.5 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. That's quite a lot. We are simultaneously constructing at the same site, Udampulan, in the state Tamil Nadu, 4 similar units, and in parallel we are discussing the possibility of constructing another 6 units of a bigger design, newer design, and the capacity of 1,200 megawatts each at a new site in India. So, those are the statistics. What stands beside the statistics? Just one illustration. The life expectancy of a nuclear power unit, a modern one, is approximately 60 years. Plus, there is the envisaged possibility, actually certainty, of extending this life cycle of 20 years. It makes 80, plus 10 years of construction, plus 10 years of decommissioning. All in all, it's 100 years. What it means when 2 countries enter into relationship with the life expectancy of 100 years, it means first and foremost a very unique and a very special level of confidence between the 2 nations. Because it means that when we take decisions, we are absolutely sure that these decisions will be delivered upon. So, all in all, tens of thousands of people in both countries are involved in our cooperation, in the process of construction, the production of the equipment, fuel fabrication, operation and maintenance, personnel formation, creating the adjacent infrastructures, and many, many things. And of course, it's many billions of dollars. So it's enormous. But it's not just the dimension. First and foremost, actually, it's very unique character. Another point, India and Russia are the established leaders of the world nuclear community. We are interacting very closely in the IAEA and other international organizations. We are working together to neutralize the lopsided and deficient interpretation by the Western powers of the green agenda, and we work together to promote the perception of a nuclear energy as an integral, indispensable, and very efficient component of the energy mix for many decades to come. So, how we see our future? Well, in a simple way, of course, we would like to continue the serial construction of Russian-designed nuclear power units at a new site in India. But that would be a linear and an oversimplified interpretation of our cooperation, which is very vibrant and very complex, and not that similar. Actually, if I draw a comparison from the relations between the individuals, one can say There is a transactional relationship, there is a transformational relationship. Our relationship with India in the field of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy definitely is a transformational relationship. The ambassador mentioned the policy made in India. Well, I would like to say with all responsibility, we do accept this policy exactly for this reason, and not because it's something forced upon us which we have to accept. We do this because we believe that currently it's the right thing to do. And it reflects the spirit of the new economic era. And that's why we have the intention to proceed with the construction of the Russian design nuclear power units at a new site, exactly in this model that is maximizing the localization in India, and not just of the construction work, that's simple, but of the production of equipment, including long cycle equipment. So, it's a completely new story. Then, just to mention a few new tracks, definitely it's the small modular reactors. Both Russia and India are huge countries with very extended coasts. And so, this nuclear power unit, both floating version and land-based version, it's exactly what is needed because they are grid friendly, they are more convenient, they take less time to construct. Then of course it's science, nuclear science, technology and innovation centers based on Russian designed research reactors. Then it's the extension, once again I have to cite the ambassador, it's the extension of our cooperation to third countries. Actually, we are doing things together right now in Bangladesh, but it's just a startup. Then it's the extension to the field of fuel fabrication. Then one very particular topic. We are increasingly interested in the acquisition in India of components and equipment, especially under current conditions of the disruption of the logistics, of the disruption of the supply chains. So, it's a very complex and very vibrant relationship. Then, but that was actually shortened as mid-term. Speaking a bit long-term, of course, it's the creation of a so-called two-component nuclear energy system with the closing of the nuclear fuel cycle, the so-called natural safety nuclear system. This is the future of the 20th century. And then, of course, it's the thermonuclear. It's the fusion. So, it's quite a lot. And I'm absolutely sure that evolving, because it's not a static relationship. It is evolving, it will be evolving. Evolving for many decades, it will provide a very essential driving force for the development of strategic partnership among our nations. I'll try very briefly to look at our cooperation from a different angle. We are here in MMO, and obviously it's not enough and it's not right just to give a report on the achievements, even though they are. And besides, our moderator quite severely instructed us to dwell on the difficulties, on the problems, on the contradictions as well. If I may, I'll speak in terms of differences. I'll give two economic examples, and then very briefly I'll tackle a serious problem. Two economic examples. For instance, I might imagine that our Indian friends might be interested to expand our cooperation into the field of the uranium enrichment. But unfortunately, we can't do it. We can't do it for a very simple reason, because our legislation contains an explicit ban on this kind of cooperation. Another example, fabrication of nuclear fuel. Well, in all probability, times will come when we will be doing it. But currently, we can't, because the conditions are not there. It's Russian technology, and the economics of this technology is our reputation. And for fuel fabrication to make sense economically, there has to be a certain number of nuclear power units for which this nuclear fuel will be destined. Currently, we have 2 units in India operational. We are constructing 4 more. That's not enough. When this figure is expanded, well, we will be perfectly ready for this kind of conversation. Then, speaking about a rather serious political problem, but from the very start, I would like to emphasize we are tackling it, and tackling it rather successfully. Well, it's naive to expect that huge countries with their own historical past, with their own particular perceptions, worldviews, would hold identical approaches towards all the problems on the world agenda. So, in our sphere, probably the most vivid example is the non-proliferation treaty. Yes, we have different approaches vis-à-vis non-proliferation treaty. That's obvious. India is not a party to the NPT. We are, and not only we are a party to the NPT, we are doing everything possible and impossible to enhance and to strengthen the mechanisms of the NPT. Not because we think that NPT is ideal. It's not ideal. It's not perfect. It's got lots of defects and imperfections. First and foremost, probably, I do accept it, that it's not based on the principle of equality. But nevertheless, it's the best that we have. And so, we agree to disagree in a very gentle and civilized and legally correct way, if necessary. When in the 90s, for instance, in the framework of the nuclear suppliers group, there were certain limitations on the international cooperation with India, we found some elegant legal formulas which permitted us to proceed. We've always come to help if needed, but I would like to say that's an example of a real difference which does not inhibit our cooperation and which does not undermine our mutual respect and confidence. So, I'm approaching here just one thing, sorry, I have to say it because it's very important. And besides speaking about the NPT, I do have to emphasize very responsible and very restrained behavior of India in the field of exports control. And actually, it's a matter of great respect for us. So, as I started, the cooperation in the field of nuclear energy is unique. And not just because I happen to be working for it, it's actually so, and it's different from other important trends. It's different from the military technical cooperation, it's different from oil and gas, it's different from infrastructures. Why? There is the formal distinction. The formal distinction is very simple. Even to do it rightful in our field, we have to have a legal base in the form of an intergovernmental agreement. Usually, it's a conjunction of two agreements to start practical cooperation. But that's the least part of it, that's the formal side. The actual difference is quite another. There are some particularities which belong only to our sphere, and those are, first and foremost, the extremely long cycles, which one does not meet us anywhere else. And besides, it's the absolute priority of the requirements of three things: nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear safety, and nuclear security. And this explains why, to proceed along with the cooperation in the field of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, it's not enough for the countries to be friends. It's not enough for them to have a very close, very intimate relationship. These countries have to share some basic values, and I'm not exaggerating. Actually, it's not a coincidence. Let us look just for a moment at certain countries: Russia, India, China, Iran, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Egypt, South Africa. One can go on. All of these countries not just share some very basic general values and some common perceptions of the current trends and processes in the world politics and politics. It's not accidental that all these countries share the common approach to nuclear energy as an integral part for the energy transition, essentially the fourth energy revolution, which is evolving before our eyes in the 21st century. With your permission, finally, just one personal remark, because I cannot not make it here in a memoir. I would like to remember two senior friends of mine who are no longer with us today. One of them is Vyacheslav Ivanovich Trubnikov, a four-star general, an ambassador in India, a person who's actually devoted his life to India, and the person, this part of his life is less known, has done quite a lot to restart, reset, and to relaunch our cooperation in the nuclear sphere in the early 2000s. And another person is Shekhar Basu, ex-secretary of the Atomic Energy Department of the government of India, with whom I had the honor and the pleasure to be working, or rather to be working under his guidance for quite some years. And you know, there are phrases which, when pronounced, stay with you for the rest of your life. Once with Dr. Basu, we were negotiating the price for the second tranche of the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. The negotiations been dragging on for many weeks without any visible success. And one day, he took me by the shoulder and he told me, let us talk as two human beings. Needless to say that the price was agreed upon by the end of the day. And I would like to end exactly with these words, because in the final analysis, the cooperation between Russia and India in the field of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, it's not so very much about the nuclear per se. First and foremost, it's about the relations between our two countries, our two peoples, and about the specific individuals who do this cooperation. Thank you very much. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо большое. Давай. Очень интересное выступление и, конечно, впечатляет тот объем, глубина сотрудничества, которое сегодня у нас есть по линии Росатома в области ядерных технологий с индийскими коллегами. И вот, когда рассказывал о прошлом, настоящем и будущем, я вспомнил известные слова одного из героев нашей истории, который говорил, что наше прошлое замечательно, настоящее прекрасно, а будущее вообще не поддается описанию. Мне хотелось бы, чтобы у нас будущее действительно было таким впечатляющим в этой сфере, да и в других, конечно, сферах, но очень важно, что в такой высокотехнологичной сфере, как сотрудничество ядерных технологий, развивается и такие серьезные перспективы. Интересное очень выступление, но я с тобой согласился в одном, что, конечно, все равно все переходит в конечном итоге на человеческие измерения, на отношения людей. И очень важно, что у нас идет такого рода процесс, он идет не так динамично, как хотелось бы. Я имею в виду встречи с коллегами, экспертами, студенческие обмены. Но я думаю, что это перспективное и важное дело, и мы будем уделять ему все больше внимания. У нас на связи, я надеюсь, находится господин Арвинд Гупта, директор Международного фонда Вивекананды из Индии. И я хотел бы попросить вас, господин Гупта, сказать несколько слов, сколько вы сочтете нужным, относительно в том числе сотрудничества в такой высокотехнологичной сфере, как информационные технологии. Я знаю, что вы здесь один из крупнейших специалистов в Индии.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I audible? It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be participating in Primakovsky meeting. When I was many years ago posted in Moscow as a young diplomat, I had the occasion of occasionally seeing Mr. Primakov, who was an intellectual giant of the times. I'm talking of the early 80s. MMO continues to remain a very important think tank, and I'm so glad to be participating in this wonderful discussion that we are having today on Indo-Russian relations. My friends and colleagues have spoken extensively about Indo-Russian relations, the present state of Indo-Russian relations, the present state of the world, and also the opportunities that are there for us to exploit, provided we are able to overcome the challenges. So I do not want to repeat much of what they have said, because I fully endorse the sentiments and suggestions that have been made by the previous speakers. I will come to the high-tech area in a while, but I just want to make a couple of general points. When the special military operations began in February this year, frankly speaking, doubts about how it will impact Indo-Russian relations. And when India abstained on UN resolutions, and a series of them, there was an implicit criticism, particularly in the Indian media, as to what India was doing. But I think our heart was in the right place, and India followed its national interests, and which was that Russia was and has been our strategic partner. It remains extremely important for us in the emerging multipolar world, and this relationship is extremely important for us. And I was reminded how often in the past Russia has come to support India in its difficult times. And I think during this difficult time for Russia, India showed a lot of maturity, did not join the Western chorus condemning Russia, and took an independent line, and I think which the Russian partners, the Russian leadership has appreciated. And this is showing dividends. And it's great to see that, it's customary to say that Indo-Russian relations have stood the test of time. But we are actually presently seeing a practical demonstration of that. There is indeed a great change in the international order. It is transiting and it is becoming uncertain, uncharted. Future is very uncertain. And I think the first few months of this post-COVID, post-Ukraine world order, which is multipolar, which is messy, Indo-Russian relations have actually stood the test of time, and a number of examples were cited. The fact that we bought almost no oil or very little oil from Russia, and today Russia is the largest supplier of oil to India as far as the October figures go. And similarly, the North-South trade corridor is becoming active, and there is a greater traction in Indo-Russian trade, which has increased by 170% or maybe even double. So there are many examples, and this is really paradoxical that at a time of such great change, and at a time when the West is following a deliberate policy of isolating Russia by weaponizing sanctions, that our relationship has not been impacted. In fact, it is now beginning to flourish. So that tells us the strong foundation of Indian-Russian relations. But having said that, and I think you also referred to in your remarks, what is the future? Surely it is very difficult to predict the future, and there are going to be many changes in the near term, in medium term, because the world itself is changing. But I think if the two sides continue to remain sensitive to their own national interests, including the security interests, I think we will be able to foster and nurture our partnership. Now, I think India was one of the very few countries which had a correct understanding of Russia's security interests in Europe, and particularly in relation to NATO expansion. So when February 24th happened, there were many articles in our press which actually appreciated and tried to give a context to why Russia did what it did. And I think we also expect that the Russian side will also show acquisition of India's security interests. China has not been mentioned here by name, but I think all those who are here on the dais and also in the hall know very well the present status of India-China relations. We have some great difficulties in that relationship, and it is right now in a stage of, let's say, not progressing too well. So long as we show mutual understanding of each other's security, core security interests, I think we'll be all right. Now, as far as India's security is concerned, and you mentioned Quad, and Sudan also dwelt upon it at length, I don't want to go into that. But I think the basic point is that India's security is linked closely with the situation in Eurasia and also in the Indo-Pacific. We cannot ignore either. We have issues on land, border, and we have issues in maritime. And we have, of course, issues in our neighborhood in the context of cross-border terrorism, support to terrorism, etc. So India's security environment is very, very complex, and we are quite clear that when it comes to the brass tacks, India will have to stand on its own, build its capacities. And I think that's where Russia comes in. Russia has been an important strategic partner, particularly military technology side, military technical side, and we have some very successful examples of cooperation, like for instance, the joint venture BrahMos. And although we are diversifying our procurements, etc., but I think Russia remains still a very important partner in the military and technical sphere. as also in energy, as it was mentioned. So, in the current state of the world order, there is a great deal of possibilities of strengthening this further, particularly in the high-tech areas. These partnerships can be strengthened in high-tech areas. Now, Atmanirbhar program, Make in India program was mentioned. I think Russian companies, Russian institutions have great opportunity to invest in India and to strike new projects in high-tech military technology. And the successful example of BrahMos should be replicated in many areas. And I think India would be open for that. India is looking for foreign investments. India is looking for technology cooperations in defense and high technology areas. In the high tech area, obviously emerging technologies are the talk of the town, and we're looking for collaborations with any country and as equal partners. Today, India has tremendous capabilities in the tech area, and Indian market today provides an opportunity for all countries, including Russian entrepreneurs, Russian investors, as well as Russian technical institutions, R&D institutions, to collaborate with the Indian side, including with the private sector. I think private sector offers a great opportunity. India is now, I think, the third largest. In terms of the startups, high-tech startups, India has the third largest globally. Something like 100,000 startups are there. So whether it is India becoming a drones hub, whether it is becoming a hub now for chip manufacture, whether it is the opening of the space, outer space technology sector to the private sector, I think these are new areas because the private sector is coming in a big way, and there is a great deal of energy amongst Indian entrepreneurs. So India and Russia relationship, which has been guided essentially through the public sector, I think needs to be transformed. And today there is a possibility of involving the private sector into these ventures. India also, for instance, in areas of fintech, for instance, I think the number of transactions that are taking place in India every month, it exceeds that of Europe, USA and China put together. So that's the kind of number of transactions which are taking place. India and Russia can also collaborate in Global South, in taking up some joint projects and joint ventures in Global South, particularly Africa. This has been under discussion in some of the earlier track 2 discussions. We have discussed this with our Russian partners, but I think now is the opportunity. So there is no dearth of opportunities, but the question will remain how we overcome the challenges that are coming our way. The weaponization of sanctions, something which is impacting the whole world. We'll have to find way of alternative payment systems. I think that's one area that we can look into. We can also activate quickly the North-South trade corridor so that our trade is not impacted, and also this will be in partnership with our partners in Iran as well as in Central Asia. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization presents a great opportunity to look at cooperation in connectivity. We also have in the Indo-Pacific going beyond, I think India-Russia cooperation, particularly under India's Act Far East policy, which incorporates Russia's Far East in India's foreign policy, and we can activate the Chennai-Vladivostok shipping line. That should be done quickly. And Sujanji mentioned about the Arctic, a great opportunity there. I think we can work on those projects as well. So I will conclude by saying that we have a great opportunity, and ironically, it is the changing world order, the rise of multipolarism, and the strong foundations that we have had over the past 7 decades, that gives me confidence that Indo-Russian relations can be adjusted, should be adjusted to new realities, but I think the future is bright, provided of course we keep our eyes and ears open. And I think the last point I want to make is that we need to pay greater attention to people-to-people contacts. So far our relationship has been state-driven, but I think people-to-people contacts need to be enhanced. And here there is a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly when it comes to the media. I think media on both sides is ill-informed, inadequately informed, and is usually driven by agendas which are set elsewhere. Particularly I can say that of Indian media, which certainly needs far more greater information about Russia. And I think on the Russian side, we also need to be better informed about what is happening in Russia, in the Russian society, and in Russian economy and so on. Most of these Russian narratives are absent from the Indian media, and I think Russia has to work hard to present those narratives to the Indian side. And similarly, I think when Ambassador Venkatesh Verma was in Moscow about a year ago, we were discussing the contacts between India and Russia on the Buddhist circuit. Buddhism has a great traction in India, and we want to talk about Indo-Russian relations and how the Buddhism on both sides connects us with each other. And I was very impressed having interacted with some of scholars in Russia on Buddhism, and I found and I realized that there's a great deal of interaction and cooperation on some of our civilization issues, including Buddhism. So I think we should take advantage of these opportunities. Thank you very much.
Да, вот всегда очень трудная роль модератора, поскольку настолько интересное выступление, что прервать их трудно, а время стремительно летит. Но вот господин Гупта говорил о, вновь повторяю, тезис, который Николай сначала сформулировал, необходимости общения тесного людей, и дружбы, и взаимопонимания. Это и бизнеса касается, и интеллектуалов, и любой сферы. И вот я должен сказать, что есть такого рода взаимодействия с нашими индийскими специалистами. Я хотел бы с удовольствием передать слово Нандану Кришнану, который мы очень давно знаем и активно, с большим удовольствием сотрудничаем на разного рода форумах. Пожалуйста. Это почетный научный сотрудник фонда Observer Research Foundation. Но многие знают лично Нандану, поэтому я не потому говорю.
Спасибо. Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Emma for giving me this opportunity to address such a distinguished audience. And I'd start the few words that I have to say by joining Mr. Spassky in remembering Ambassador Trubnikov, who personally gave me personally many deep insights into the Indo-Russian relationship, and which inform some of the remarks that I'm going to make. I'm very well known as a contrarian, particularly to many of you, and I think I'm not going to move away from that role. I've heard a lot of positive words about the Indo-Russian relationship, and while I broadly agree with every single one of them, I also think that we have to look at some of the underwater stones that exist, and so therefore a reality check is required, and I will attempt to pinpoint very briefly 3 or 4 of these problems. The first is, I think all of you have to keep in mind, is that India's primary challenge is not security. India's primary challenge is development within its own country. There are hundreds and millions of Indians who have to be provided with a better life. And therefore, the challenge for any government in India, apart from providing a secure atmosphere is development. And for that development, India requires a stable world. It requires stability, not only in a security sense, but stability in an economic sense, where there is no volatility in commodity prices, where supply chains are not disrupted, and long-term planning of development is possible. Given that, if you look at that overarching umbrella that will govern India's domestic policy, and therefore will significantly reflect on India's foreign policy, the one thing I think everyone in this hall should remember very clearly, yes, a multipolar world is good for India-Russia relations because it will keep this relationship going. But it is important to remember that it is a multipolar world, and India will keep its good relationships with all the poles. And therefore, there is not a hope in hell that India will ever join anything that even smells of being anti-Western. So that is something that has to be kept in mind very clearly. While that is a challenge at that level, I will go back for a second to something else. I remember in 1998, I was a journalist at that stage, when Mr. Primakov arrived at Delhi airport. He spoke those famous words about, Russia, India, China. I remember that I personally reacted with a dose of skepticism. And the reason for that skepticism was that there were several people in the Indian government at very senior levels who just before that, during the nuclear tests in India in May 1998, spoke of our northern neighbor being one of the reasons why we were weaponizing or why we were going nuclear. And in that context, to think that here we were attempting to become a nuclear power state and that we would wholeheartedly cooperate in an RIC framework was to me an expectation too high. Today also I look at that relationship with a certain amount of skepticism, although I acknowledge that since 1962 it is the Soviet Union and it is Russia in the more modern days that has played some kind of role of ensuring that a conversation ensues between Beijing and New Delhi. Coming back to the bilateral level, I would like to point out that yes, it's very good that trade is going to go to $30 billion very soon on the back of the imports that India is making from Russia. Yes, it is very good that connectivity projects are being revived, the North-South corridor, the Chennai-Vladivostok shipping lane. But what has to be remembered is that in any trade relationship, there has to be balance. And what we have today is a humongous Russian surplus, which is accumulating. And I think people on both sides, in India and Russia, are thinking in terms of what do we do with these billions of rupees that will accumulate in Indian accounts at a later stage, and how does Russia utilize them? I think there are solutions. We have to be innovative about them, but standing here now and looking at it today, it seems as a difficult problem, because even with the best of intentions, I do not see India being able to export anything that equals the level of imports that is coming in. But if, and this ties into Ambassador Sujin Chenoy's point about the Make in India program, if the Russian Federation is allowed to use some of those surpluses that it has for investments into some kind of joint ventures, maybe even in the military field, that I think would be a positive step forward, which would both strengthen the relationship as well as meet India's demands of producing and becoming independent in its quest to become a great power. The third thing that I would like everyone to keep in mind is that India is going through a huge change at the political, at the social, at the economic level. There are many reforms that are being undertaken, and this change is not necessarily going to be smooth. There will be problematic areas. So these will also have to be taken into account when there is long-term planning about our relationship. I would like to end and leave some time for Tatiana Lvovna to speak, but I would like to end on a more positive note and point out that at the Observer Research Foundation, we recently conducted a poll of a large number of young people, and it surprised me that these young people in that poll indicated that today the most trusted friend India had was Russia. So I was very pleasantly surprised that youngsters who are below 30, who have no memory of 1971 or Soviet Union, vetoes in the United Nations, yet they felt that Russia was the most reliable friend India had. But the cautionary note in that poll is that they were also asked the same question about who would be India's best friend in 10 years from now. And Russia was not in position number 1. Russia was much lower. In position number 1 was the United States of America and the West. I think both governments have to work towards not necessarily, you may not be able to stop that, but at least slow down that process. Thank you.